I used to think there was nothing lonelier than a laundromat after midnight. The hum of machines replacing conversation, the fluorescent buzz settling into the bones like a second artificial heartbeat. The street outside was a pane of black glass, traffic reduced to an occasional groan from a night bus, neon reflections breathing on puddles. Inside, the coin changer coughed now and then, the TV on mute looped weather warnings, and I, keyholder cleaner clerk, made circuits between aisles of steel mouths that chewed shirts and spat steam. If solitude had a sound, it would have been the click of lone quarters marching down a slot and the hollow clack of a washer door sealing shut. At 12:43 a.m., a storm braided itself across the city. The power hiccuped, flickered, recovered, and the wall clock froze for a breath too long before stumbling back into motion. On the camera feed above the change counter, the picture fractured, doubled, then smoothed, like the laundromat was swallowing an echo of itself. I was used to glitches. Machines are honest when they break, they shriek or stop or spill. They don't pretend. People do. Machines don't look away when you find what they leave behind. Lost and found is a kingdom of small tragedies in any laundromat. Socks that will never reunite, a cracked phone that buzzed for 3 days, a child's unicorn hoodie whose sugar-pink ears sagged with the weight of someone's panic. Once, while cleaning the lint trap on dryer 9, I found a ring, plain gold with a bite taken out of it like someone had tested its reality with their teeth. We keep a ledger of items. We keep a ledger of names. The ring's owner never returned. Most nights, the regulars would keep me company. The night shift nurse who watched crime dramas with closed captions, the cab driver who slept under the table by the window, the graduate student who treated stains like equations. But the storm clawed everyone home early. By 1:15 a.m., I was alone with the machines and the pocket full of quarters jangling like reluctant bones. That was when washer 14 woke up. I heard it before I saw the lights on its panel will themselves on. A gentle whine like someone testing the end of a violin string. The drum turned once, lazy as an eye-opening. I frowned. No one had loaded it. The door was latched, but inside the drum was empty except for a smudge of lint clinging to a perforation like a moth. The digital timer blinked 2:17 in segmented red, though the wall clock insisted it was 1:17. A glitch, I thought. Storms confuse old circuits. I unplugged the machine, counted to 10, and plugged it back in. The panel died, then woke, breathing out a new number. 2:17. Again. A small, stupid coincidence. I had handled worse. I moved on. When I pushed the cart to the far aisle, I caught it in the corner of my eye, the reflection in the washer door. Everyone who works in a place with mirrors learns the language of reflections. You can recognize a regular from a smudge of color or a posture. You can sense when you're not alone. In the convex glass of washer 7, the aisle extended farther than it should. For a second, the row seemed to slope away to an impossible depth, a tunnel of round windows shrinking into darkness. My brain corrected it, blinked, returned the aisle to its right angle. The hum braided itself tighter. The TV showed a radar swirl spiraling like laundry. I went back to the counter and checked the log. The closing tasks were familiar incantations. Wipe, sweep, empty, refill, count. The rain turned savage against the glass. The door chime dinged once as the wind pressed and retreated, a polite ghost. I told myself I'd lock up early. The manager wouldn't argue with a storm. I had just penciled that decision into my brain when a coin hit the tile behind me, skittered and lay still with a tremble that felt indecently alive. I turned around too fast for coolness. A quarter lay by the soda machine. Another, a few feet away, near the vending machine that sold tiny boxes of detergent and a refusal to make change. A third quarter dripped from the slot of the coin changer and sat on the metal lip like a tear that wanted to fall. "Okay," I said aloud, but softly, as if not to startle anything that might be listening. The coin changer was old but faithful. It only spat coins when it was fed. I hadn't fed it. I pressed my fingers to the machine's side. It was warm, like a sleeping dog. Somewhere in the storm, a transformer groaned. The lights dimmed, brightened. On the camera feed, I saw myself tilt my head, smaller and grainier than I felt. When I bent to gather the quarters, a smell lifted from the floor I didn't know how to name at first. The laundromat has its own perfume, cotton and soap, chemical citrus, the tired, warm smell of bodies passing through. This was water that had been trapped too long, metal that had breathed in a dark place, summer pond sucked through a straw. I followed it down the central aisle. It strengthened near washer 7, where a dark shine bled from beneath the machine, a thin crescent that caught light like an eyelid about to open. The floor wasn't wet before. I would have noticed. The leak glowed around the edges of washer 7 like a thought. I lifted the mat, slid the machine's tow guard aside with my foot, and crouched. The drain trap access panel under washer 7 had been difficult to unscrew last week. I'd complained about it, the way sediment calcifies stubbornness. Now the panel hung skewed, one screw clinging in a stripped mouth, as if someone had rushed to put it back at an angle like buttoning a shirt wrong in the dark. The dark smell pressed up from the void that panel should have covered. On the camera screen, the view split for just a heartbeat. 2 frames of me crouched at 2 different angles like I couldn't negotiate with my own posture. In one frame, my head was turned. In the other, my face was toward the floor, listening. The feed caught up with itself. I swallowed. I listened. The storm's percussion softened to a hiss in here, as if the room held its breath when your ear got close to certain secrets. Inside washer 7's guts, a sound rose that would have been ridiculous in the sunlight. A polite little drip that landed too slowly, as if gravity had to coax each drop down with a whisper and a promise. Between drips, there was something else, like a throat clearing before a word that didn't know it was a word yet. I had a flashlight in my apron. Its beam was narrow and mean. I slid it into the opening. The light found pipes and a shine on metal. A tangled cobweb sprayed into a net. A smear of lint that had turned the color of stormwater. It also found something round, half submerged in shadow, white as a claw of porcelain. For an instant, my brain cataloged it. A soap dish, a toy, a fragment of a thing that had broken and lodged where no broom could argue it out. Then the white moved. Not drifting, not current, but a suggestion from beneath. A ripple running from far to near like muscle under skin. The crescent of water trembled at the machine's edge, lapped my thumbnail, retreated with the coyness of a tongue. A small tap, like bone on metal, answered the light. Tap. Then tap, tap. Not enough to be loud, but precise enough to be intentional. I slid the flashlight closer. The white thing turned as if curious about the source of illumination. In the reflection of the washer's door above me, I saw motion behind my own back, a figure-shaped smear that stood in the aisle on the feed's far edge. I turned. No one stood there. When I looked back at the reflection, my back still blocked the aisle, but a second me leaned in closer than the first, breathing fog onto the washer door from a face that didn't fog at all. The fog pattern lingered longer than breath should. I blinked hard until the skin between my eyebrows hurt. When I opened my eyes, washer 14's panel in the next row pulsed red again. 217, as courteous and patient as a warning that will let you refuse it. From somewhere deep in the drain, a coin fell and spun without ringing, like it had learned a new gravity. The smell unfurled, patient and hungry. I set the flashlight down, the beam pegging the white like a nail of light, and reached for the drain trap with one hand. The trap cap was slick, the texture of cold, fat fish. Behind me, the door chime dinged once, not because the door had opened, but because the air had decided to remember how it felt to be moved by an arrival. I turned the cap. Something turned with it from the deep end of the system, answering like a partner in a slow dance. The drip paused. The buzzing lights dimmed just enough to let the shadows be honest. When the cap came free, the water didn't gush. It breathed out, like the first exhale of someone who'd been hiding under a bed too long. I smelled iron and mildew and a sweetness that memories sometimes have when they're rotting. The white rose up an inch, 2, enough for the beam to catch the ridges pressed into it by long captivity. It was not a toy. It was not porcelain. It was the curve of something that had learned darkness like a language. And as it lifted, something else came with it. A thin, pale line sliding up the pipe, straining against a pinch point like a knuckle forcing through a ring that didn't want to give. I should have stopped. I should have called maintenance, called the manager, called anyone whose job description did not include naming things that shouldn't be named. But the laundromat had rules you don't put on plaques. If something clogs the system, you clear it, because if you don't, the system keeps what it's taken. I leaned closer. The pale curve trembled once, pressed against the lip of the opening with the insistence of something testing whether the world had softened while it was away. And then it knocked again, tap, tap, from inside the drain, like a neighbor asking to borrow sugar from a home that wasn't supposed to be there. The cap came loose with a final twist, and what pushed through wasn't a surge of water, but a soft emergence, as though the pipe itself had decided to give birth. A pale hand, limp and delicate as wet laundry, pressed against the lip of the opening, fingers trembling with an effort that didn't belong to muscles I recognized. The skin was waxy, as if it had been soaked in the drum too long, but beneath that pallor, I thought I saw veins that pulsed in rhythm with the overhead lights. I stumbled back, the flashlight clattering to the floor, spinning in frantic arcs that painted the hand in a strobe. Each pulse of light made it seem closer, stronger, until it gripped the washer's frame with a resolve that shrieked against the metal. The sound was too human to dismiss, too alien to forgive. The chime dinged again. This time it was followed by the hiss of the door actually opening. Cold air slithered across the tile. My chest forgot how to rise for a second. I turned slowly, half praying it would just be some soaked straggler caught in the storm, demanding dry towels and warmth. But the doorway was empty. Empty except for the rain that had decided not to fall outside anymore. But here, faintly, pattering across the linoleum in a circle just inside the threshold. The hand had become an arm, the skin stretched too tight around joints, dripping with a sludge that smelled like graveside soil. I told myself it was a nightmare, the kind that comes when you lock yourself into solitude too many nights in a row. But the camera feed above the counter caught it too, grainy, shaking, the arms outlined dark against the silver machines. It was real enough to be recorded, real enough to be played back later, if later ever arrived. "Stop," I whispered, though I didn't know who I was addressing. The storm, the hand, or the part of me that still thought standing still would make it all reconsider. The arm dragged higher, the shoulder emerging, and with it came a face. Not one built for mirrors or photographs. It was pale like porcelain that had drowned, its features smoothed into anonymity, eyes wide and black like water stains that never dried. The mouth opened and shut, not in speech but in the repetition of drowning, the rehearsal of suffocation. From it leaked that same iron sweetness, a perfume of old blood and stagnant wells. I grabbed the broom from behind the counter, its bristles frayed into uselessness, and jabbed it toward the thing. It didn't recoil. It simply tilted its head almost curious before a sound rose from its throat. A low hum, perfectly synchronized with the turning drums of every washer in the room. The machines had all woken up. Their panels glared red. 2:17. Again. Again. An endless chorus of a time that refused to pass. Water began to spill from the machines, not rushing, but seeping in long, dark sheets, pooling around my ankles. In each reflection of those spreading puddles, I didn't see myself. I saw figures, dozens of them, standing shoulder to shoulder, drenched, heads bowed as though in worship. They were waiting. The hum grew louder, vibrating the glass doors until one cracked down the middle like an eye splitting open. The thing from washer 7 pulled itself free, bones popping like breaking hangers, its limbs too long, bent wrong. It landed on the floor with a wet slap, and for the first time, it straightened to full height. It was taller than the machines, taller than any customer I'd ever rung up. It leaned toward me, and from its chest spilled more coins, tumbling to the floor, spinning in frantic spirals without ever settling. I ran. Not for the door. The circle of rain at the entrance shimmered like a trap, a boundary no sane animal would cross, but toward the back room, where the breaker switches and supply closet sat. The camera feeds followed me, the monitors flipping angles on their own, showing me from above, from behind, from impossible corners. Each screen displayed a different version of my flight. In one, I was already caught. In another, I never moved at all. The breaker switch was stiff with rust, but I yanked it down. The lights died. The hum ceased. For a heartbeat, silence blessed me, thick and whole. But then from the dark, I heard the rhythm of the drip again, impossibly close, as if the drain I'd opened had relocated itself to the ceiling, to the walls, to the inside of my ears. And then the lights surged back on without permission. The laundromat was crowded. Every machine had a figure pressed against its glass door, faces stretched flat, hands slapping weakly as though begging to be let out. Children, men, women, all pale, all soaked. Some mouthed words, but no sound emerged, just the mechanical churn of cycles that had no end. Washer 14 flashed 217 in a mad pulse. The thing from Washer 7 had crossed the room. It stood inches away, its faceless head tilting with a tenderness that made me want to scream. It leaned forward until its forehead touched mine. The cold of it drilled into my skull. And behind my eyes I saw the laundromat not as it was, but as it had been. Year after year of people loading clothes, laughing, crying, folding, leaving. I saw the ones who never left. The missing. The ledger items that were never claimed. They were all here, cycling, rinsing, waiting to be worn again by someone who no longer had a body. The mouth opened once more, and this time it spoke. Not in language, but in the sound of water filling lungs. It poured into me, drowning me from the inside. I fell, thrashing, the quarters skittering around me like insects. The last thing I saw before the water closed my vision was the camera feed. On it, the laundromat was empty. No figures, no creature, no flood. Just me, slumped by Washer 7, face pressed against the tiles, as the machine spun peacefully on. The timestamp, 2:17. It is always 2:17. The first time the receipt printer screamed, it didn't sound like paper. It sounded like a match dragged along the side of a damp book. A crackle that didn't belong to the calm afternoon heat or to the soft clatter of buttons tumbling inside a dryer. The laundromat wore its name like an apology, Sunny Suds, even though the sun outside had been boiled flat by a July haze and the only light that mattered came from the long halogen tubes shivering overhead. Through the front windows, Auburn Avenue bent in a mirage, cars wobbling in the heat as if drunk on the asphalt. Inside, the air tasted like detergent swallowed by an oven. I was there to fix the card reader, not to diagnose the way a room could remember. The owner had called 3 times in a week, each message more tired than the last. The kiosk that loaded credits onto the plastic laundry cards would freeze, unfreeze, and then spit out a receipt longer than anyone had the patience to read. People got impatient quickly in a laundromat. Clothes made you confront time in a way that made you mean. He said his name was Fareed. He said he'd bought Sunny Suds because laundry had to happen in every economy. He said heat was good for business, as long as it stayed in the machines. Sunny Suds had a dozen front loaders that slouched in 2 neat rows like open mouths, rendered devout by the slow spin of prayer. The dryers stacked against the back wall, tall as a confession booth. Fluorescent light made everyone look like they'd been cut from paper and glued back down slightly off-center. A television above the folding table whispered captions about a heat advisory and the brittle patience of an electrical grid. And by the door, just inside the angled shadow thrown by the soda machine, the kiosk waited. A white box with a thin receipt maw, a green LED winking too often. Fareed apologized again as he handed me a ring of keys and a bottle of water that already felt warm in my hand. He was slight, the kind of man who looked like his bones carried old fatigue the way a coat carries last winter's lint. His wrists were tattooed with prayer in a language I couldn't read. He kept looking over his shoulder at Dryer 31 as if a kid he loved had disappeared behind its glass. I promised him I'd be quick. I said things like firmware and thermal rolls and card encoders. He nodded like a man who would make a decision after someone else had. The printers in these machines are simple, I told him. They don't scream. The kiosk woke when I opened it, as if relieved to be seen. A green board blinked, apologetic. The roll of paper had unspooled most of itself into the belly of the cabinet, a long ribbon that looped and twisted like a white vein. I gathered it carefully, the paper warm enough to feel like skin. Words had burned into it in pixels that shimmered from black to brown where the heat had scorched too much. Receipt, 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 a litany that gave way to timestamps and amounts, and then without warning turned into a list of names, not customer numbers. Names. The first was common enough I didn't flinch, Maria, then another, and another, some unfamiliar, some like stones everyone has kicked down the same hill. At the bottom of one coil, a line of text had melted into a blur from the heat. When I smoothed it, the world tilted. Just a fraction. It said, "Do not dry on high." It said, "Do not leave alone." It said, "Return to owner." Glitch, I said, because a word like that can calm a man who has too much to lose. Bad firmware. It treats noise as instruction. Farid smiled without committing to the emotion. He drifted away to talk to a woman feeding quarters into a washer with the concentration of a surgeon. When the printer shrieked the second time, I didn't pretend it was polite. The sound rose, metal against teeth. The paper churned and vomited a new strip, 6 inches, a foot, 2 feet before I slapped the power. The strip fell like a surrender flag landing against my shin. This one didn't bother with amounts. It printed a dryer number and a temperature 31, high, 31, high, 31, high. The line repeated until the strip ran out of itself, as if repetition could become prayer. Dryer 31 hummed in the back like it had learned to purr from an animal that had only ever watched TV. Its glass held the thin distortions of heat. A shirt flipping, a sleeve slapping the door, a red thread stitching circles in air. No one had paid for it. The card reader on its side blinked amber, the color of a caution that expected not to be heard. I watched as if the machine might confess something if I stared long enough. The shirt inside bloused against the glass and stuck a moment, the way skin sometimes adheres to leather on a summer seat. For an instant, I saw letters reversed in the glass, black on white. I stepped closer as if I could read them by smell. They spelled a name that could have been anyone's, the kind of name you might write into the collar of a child's jacket. It fogged and vanished. "Thermostats in those old ones drift," I said to no one in particular. I had once been a man who spoke only when spoken to. Sunny Suds made even quiet people narrate. Heat will do that. Heat is an editor. I pulled the kiosk's logic board and reseated it. I cut the thermal roll free and started a fresh one neat and square. I cycled the power. The green LED settled into a healthy blink, a heartbeat finding its rhythm. The woman at the front table folded towels with a ferocity that suggested towels had wronged her personally. A teenager sat cross-legged by washer 5, watching a phone's black mirror that never lit. The air was so hot, the soda in the vending machine seemed to sweat. The printer fed a test inch of paper and printed the date. It was correct, though the digits seemed to pulse. I turned toward Farid to tell him we'd likely stop hemorrhaging paper. He wasn't at the counter. He was at the back wall, one hand on dryer 31, as if feeling a child's forehead for fever. His posture held a softness that made me ache. He noticed me noticing and straightened too quickly. A half smile confessed more than it intended. He came back up the aisle with a box of dryer sheets that left a sweet scent in his wake like a lie you tell yourself when you need sleep. "Heat makes the printer dramatic," I said, "but it's fine now." Farid nodded. His eyes slipped to dryer 31 again, then back. "We had a fire 2 owners ago," he said, voice quiet enough to hide in. "Lint in the vents. Small. No one hurt. But sometimes the room remembers." He said it like a man who had rehearsed it for inspectors. He said it like someone who wanted it to be true because the alternative was older and worse. I told him I'd check the vent traps anyway. A dryer is a throat that can choke even when it looks like it's singing. He handed me a nut driver with fingers that measured the space between knuckles the way a tailor measures a cuff. Behind us, a washer clicked over into spin, the water flattening itself into a fast river behind glass. The back panel of dryer 31 unfastened with a stutter like breaking a seal. Heat hit my face with the intimacy of breath. A thread of red lint snaked into the duct like a fuse burned halfway. When I reached in with the brush, the bristles came away with handfuls of gray that clung like wet animal fur. Embedded in the mat of lint were the glittering, stupid artifacts laundry eats. 3 dimes, a earring that had lost its mate, a nickel flattened into an oval by some punishment I didn't understand. A smell rose that had nothing to do with cotton or heat. Sweet, burnt, the chemical bite of hair. I closed my eyes and saw a field at dusk lit by too many fireflies. I opened them and told myself stories about melting plastic and scorched dryer sheets. Something clicked behind the drum, a polite acknowledgement like a finger against a microphone to test a system. The rotating cylinder slowed, then held, then lurched, a reluctant agreement to keep going. In the window, the shirt pressed itself flat again. The letters were clearer this time. I bent close enough to fog the glass. The name was Nora. My mouth formed the word without sound. It tasted like the edge of a coin. The receipt printer, all the way up front, spat a single inch of paper as if jealous of my attention. I wiped my hands and went to it because men who fix machines accept summons written in heat. The strip said, "Return to owner, Nora." The colon looked like eyes. The room changed then, but nothing actually moved. The air thickened, the way a room feels when a storm makes up its mind, when a conversation chooses to stop being small talk. The teenager's phone lit for the first time and showed a reflection of the ceiling lights stretched long like knives. The folding woman's hands slowed, then forgot the choreography of corners. Fareed stood with both palms flat on the counter, staring at a spot someplace between now and a year he hadn't forgiven yet. I told myself a prank could be small and still be cruel. I told myself the kiosk had cached a name from a lost card. I told myself heat prints words on a body that already intends to bruise. When I lifted the kiosk again, a draft rose from inside it. Impossible and cold, the opposite of the room. The paper fluttered. Somewhere behind me, dryer 31's hum sharpened into a note I recognized not as a sound but as a posture. A child trying not to cry in public. I turned and saw Fareed's face emptied of everything except a flinch, the way someone looks when the worst thing they know tries to introduce itself with a different name. I held up the strip like a flag of truce. "Do you have a regular named Nora?" I asked, careful not to put too much in the question, careful not to invite anything I couldn't negotiate with a screwdriver. Fareed's lips parted, then closed, then parted again. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The printer did it for him, waking with a fresh scream, spooling a ribbon that unrolled to my feet, curling like a spine. The letters seared themselves onto the paper so dark they looked wet. "Return to owner. Return to owner. Return to..." The strip ran out before the sentence could forgive itself. Behind us, dryer 31's window fogged from the inside with a breath that had been holding itself for too long. The receipt strip trailed across the tile like a pale tongue, curling and uncurling with the rhythm of the air conditioner that had no business blowing that cold. Fareed didn't pick it up. He didn't even move. He just stared at dryer 31, where the glass pulsed faintly red, as though a coil deep inside the machine had remembered a fire it had promised not to repeat. The hum from the dryer grew into a roar, though the drum didn't seem to move. The clothes inside, there were clothes, though I hadn't seen anyone load them, slapped against the window in fits, sticking as if coated with syrup. I watched the pattern for half a minute before I realized it wasn't random. The slaps were spelling something, each pause between hits a kind of punctuation. My brain didn't want to translate, but it did anyway. Help, help, help. The receipt printer shrieked in counterpoint, spitting paper until it looked like the floor itself was shedding. The strips twisted on the tiles, printed words blurring into each other, repeating the name. Nora. 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 I turned on Fareed, furious without knowing why, the way a man gets furious when he's too close to admitting fear. "What happened here?" My voice cracked in the heat, brittle. "Who is she?" He looked at me with eyes that had been empty for years. My daughter, he said, the words sandpapered into something sharp. She died in the fire. It was small, they said, contained, but she never came out. He pressed both hands flat against the counter again, knuckles whitening. I bought this place because I thought if I kept it alive, maybe I'd know where she went. Maybe she'd know where to find me. Before I could answer, Dryer 31 stopped humming. Silence fell so fast it hurt. Then, with a sound like knuckles rapping on a coffin lid, the machine's glass door swung open by itself. Heat bled out in a wave that made my vision blur. A shirt sleeve dangled from the drum. It wasn't red anymore. It was black, charred, still glowing at the seams with embers that refused to die. I smelled hair again, burned so recently it made my throat close. And then, from the darkness inside the drum, a hand emerged. It was small, child small. The woman folding towels gasped and dropped everything to the floor. The teenager's phone snapped dark, screen cracking in his grip. Fareed made a sound like prayer but without words. The hand gripped the edge of the drum and slowly, impossibly, a figure pulled itself forward. Skin flaked like ash, eyes black sockets ringed with raw light. A child's frame, hair singed away, clothes burned into permanent wrinkles. She didn't step out. She fell, landing on her hands and knees, steam rising off her skin. I wanted to run. God, I wanted to. But her head lifted, and in those empty sockets burned something that pinned me in place. She crawled toward the receipts littering the floor, fingers clutching the curling paper. She pressed strip after strip against her chest. The words returned to owner, branding themselves against her skin until smoke rose. She didn't scream. She didn't need to. Daddy, she whispered. Fareed broke. He crossed the space between them in seconds, knees buckling as he reached for her. His arms went around the burning figure, and I expected fire, I expected pain, but instead of flame, it was cold that filled the room. The halogen lights flickered blue. Frost rimmed the corners of the washers. My breath plumed white. Fareed sobbed into her shoulder, rocking her like a baby, even as ash crumbled between his fingers. She clung to him with all the strength of the dead who don't want to stay that way, and as they held each other, the receipts kept printing, faster now, faster, until the paper tangled itself into a mountain between us, rising like snow that cuts. The child's head turned, those socket eyes fixed on me. She smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just the way something does when it notices you've overstayed your welcome. The receipts stopped. Silence pooled. Then every dryer door in the room popped open at once. From each machine, smoke poured, thick and black, carrying shapes inside it, faces pressing against vapor, mouths opening, silent screams etched in fog. The laundromat filled with them, dozens of Nora-shaped things, burned and unfinished, climbing out of machines that had never been loaded. They reached for the paper strips, clutching them, wrapping themselves in the endless white until the floor looked like a graveyard of shrouds. I ran for the door, slamming against the circle of rain still painted on the threshold. It was a wall. My body bounced back like I'd hit glass. Behind me, Fareed laughed and sobbed at once, clutching his child while the others gathered closer, dragging strips of paper across the tiles, weaving them into something like skin. Owner. The voices whispered together. Owner. Owner. The kiosk lit green again, its LED pulsing like a heart that had found a rhythm. It printed one last strip. I didn't want to read it, but my eyes betrayed me. Return to owner. You. The dryers roared. Heat swallowed the room, and the last thing I saw before the world went white was the child's ash hand reaching for my chest, pressing the burning receipt there like a brand. The scar still smells like smoke, and sometimes when I close my eyes I hear the printer scream. No one goes to a basement laundromat by choice at 2 a.m. It's the kind of errand you invent excuses for, the kind of task you save until sunlight feels like protection. But sometimes protection is a luxury, And sometimes the landlord promises the washer upstairs will be fixed next week, until months turn into seasons. That's how I found myself dragging a plastic basket down chipped cement steps that smelled like wet stone and rust, pushing open a door that sighed like it had been waiting for me. The sign above the door once said, "Quick Clean," but half the letters had peeled away, leaving cute, Cal, and glowing faintly under a flickering strip bulb. The hum inside was steady, the kind of white noise that sounds like the last breath of something enormous. The air was thick with bleach, sour with damp socks, and yet under it all lay a musk of something older, like paper rotting in a flooded basement. I had 2 bags of clothes and no patience. The machines stood in uneven rows, their chrome bellies fogged with streaks of detergent. Half of them were unplugged, cords coiled on the floor like abandoned snakes. A few whispered to themselves even when empty, a rotation too slow to be mechanical. At the counter sat a man I hadn't seen before. The usual attendant, Mrs. Ortega, liked to keep the television blaring soap operas while she smoked on the steps. This man didn't smoke. He didn't watch TV. He sat perfectly still, his face pale under the fluorescent lights, hands folded like a priest about to say confession. His eyes didn't follow me when I came in. They stayed locked on a washer in the far corner, the one with a strip of duct tape sealing a crack in its door. "Just quarters," I muttered, dropping a few bills into the changer. The machine coughed coins into the tray with a violence that startled me. The man at the counter didn't blink. I loaded my clothes into washer 12, fed it the quarters, and pressed start. The water rushed in, hot enough to steam against the glass. I pulled out my phone, but the signal was gone. No bars, just a spinning icon that seemed to take pleasure in mocking me. Basements kill reception. I told myself that's all it was. By the 3rd minute, I noticed something wrong. The washer's drum spun normally, but in the reflection of the glass, I wasn't alone. At first, I thought it was a trick of angle, my body doubled by the glare of lights. But the figure in the reflection wasn't sitting where I was. It stood behind me, tall, thin, its head tilted too far to one side, like it was studying the back of my skull. I turned fast. Nothing. Just the empty aisle, the hum of machines, the man at the counter still watching the taped-up washer. I rubbed my eyes and laughed under my breath. I was tired. This was just tired. The washer rattled once, hard enough to shift across the floor an inch. Soap foam bled from the crack around the door. A low thump echoed from inside, too heavy to be a shirt, too deliberate to be random. Then another, then 2, fast together, like fists. "Hey," I called to the man at the counter. "This machine—" But he didn't answer, didn't move, didn't even breathe. I stepped closer to the washer. The foam smeared the glass, but I could still see the shape swirling inside. My jeans, my shirts, a towel, and something else. Something pale pressed flat against the glass like a face trying to surface from water. The mouth opened. A bubble of air escaped, then popped. I staggered back. My hip knocked into washer 13. Its door swung open though I hadn't touched it. Cold water splashed onto my leg. Inside, the drum was empty. No clothes. Just water that pooled and didn't drain. Dark and still. The lights overhead flickered. When they steadied, every washer door in the room had fogged over. Handprints smeared across the glass from the inside. Dozens of them, small, large, pressed in frantic repetition. The thumping grew louder, synchronized, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to any single body but to the room itself. I turned to the counter for help. But the man was gone. The stool sat empty, rocking slightly as if someone had just stood. The TV behind it clicked on without sound, static. No picture, no channel, just snow. But in the snow, I swore I saw faces flickering in and out, mouths stretched wide, eyes drowning in white. I backed toward the stairs. My basket was still by the door, but the clothes I hadn't loaded yet were gone. Just gone. The linoleum where the basket sat was wet, a trail of drops leading back toward washer 12. The thumping stopped. Silence fell so heavy I could hear my own blood rushing in my ears. Then from inside washer 12 came a voice, faint, gurgling through the foam, like someone speaking with a mouthful of water. It said my name. I froze. I don't remember ever giving my name to Mrs. Ortega. I certainly hadn't given it to the pale man. But Washer 12 said it again, clear this time. Each syllable stretched like it was being wrung from fabric. The duct-taped washer in the corner banged once, hard enough to rock against the wall. The tape split. Foam oozed out like blood through a bandage. The TV static sharpened into screaming. I ran for the stairs, but the door slammed shut before I reached it. The lock clicked from the other side. Behind me, water poured from the machines, spreading fast, reaching my shoes. It was warm at first, then, suddenly, icy. So cold it burned. Reflections formed in it, not mine, but faces pressed just beneath the surface, as though the floor had become a pane of glass separating me from the drowned. Their hands reached upward, palms smacking the underside, leaving ripples that warped into words. Stay. The washers began to spin faster, every drum in unison, a chorus of whirling glass. The noise rose to a shriek, metal grinding against itself. And over it all my name again, louder, insistent, as if the machines were calling me home. And then, just as I thought the sound would shatter the walls, silence crashed back. Only one washer still moved. Washer 12. Its foam cleared from the glass. And pressed against the window, unmistakable now, was my own face. My lips moved, whispering words I couldn't hear, while my real mouth stayed frozen in horror. The reflection grinned. My reflected mouth stretched wider until the grin looked carved. The teeth in the glass weren't mine. They were a perfect row too uniform to belong to anything that ate. I raised a hand. The reflection didn't. It kept smiling, water beading at the corners of its lips like sweat. When it finally moved, it mouthed 3 syllables that fogged the inside of the drum in pulses. You know me. Behind me, the duct-taped washer in the corner coughed open with a wet gasp. The split tape peeled away in a slow, adhesive tear, and the door eased outward as if pushed by a gentle palm. A black tide slid over the lip and crept across the floor, thin as spilled ink, absorbing every light it touched. It reached my shoe and climbed the leather like a shadow learning to be wet. The smell that rose wasn't bleach or mildew. It was paper burned in a metal trash can, hair singed on a stove, a page torn out of a family album and fed to an unkind fire. Mrs. Ortega, I called, like a child calling for a bedtime already lost. The word fractured in the humming air. The stool behind the counter rocked itself still. The TV's snow sharpened into lines, not pictures, but the idea of pictures. Resolution failing to hold. Faces surfaced and broke in the static, mouths open with soundless indignation, like they had been interrupted in an argument that mattered. Washer 12 clicked. The lock released. The drum coasted to a stop with a lazy final turn, and the door unlatched itself a 1/4 inch. My reflection remained flush to the glass as if smashed against a pane on the other side. Its grin softened into something tender, something patient. The thin seam of open door breathed out a thread of warm vapor that tasted like pennies and old soap. I should have run my shoulder against the stair door until wood splintered. I should have screamed until someone upstairs called the super, or the police, or a priest. Instead, I did the thing the room wanted. I curled my fingers under the lip of the door and pulled. The door swung wide on a hinge that didn't squeal. The drum's belly glowed a pale, unkind white. A slither of suds eased over the rim and collapsed at my feet in a sigh. Inside, my clothes clung to the perforated steel like constellations stuck in the sky. Between a towel and my jeans, the reflection crouched. No longer a reflection, but a figure with my shape, my shoulders, my hair. A parodic echo that the water had taught itself to wear. Its eyes were mine, drawn with a child's certainty, circles too dark and too perfect. When it breathed, bubbles rose from its lips and popped in a rhythm that made a word when I didn't want one. Stay. I stumbled back. My calves hit the plastic basket I swore I had left by the door, and that now sat close behind me like a dog that had learned a crueler trick. It was empty. The t-shirts I hadn't loaded were gone, swallowed without sound. the plastic still damp from hands that weren't mine. The duct-taped washer yawned wider. Something thin and white uncoiled from inside it, trailing a line of gray lint as a tail. It took a blind step, then another, a limb learning weight again. Fingernails clicked against tile. The hand was too long, the wrist bent wrong, but the gesture, tentative, groping, hopeful, was so horribly human that for a second I saw my mother reaching for the light switch in a dark room when I was small and scared. The hand flattened itself in the puddle on the floor and left a print that didn't fade. Another hand followed. The thing that emerged was not a thing. It was a person remembered by a poor artist, the features smeared, the symmetry guessed at, the eyes placed by feeling rather than measurement. It had the height of the pale man from the counter, and when it turned its head, water poured from its ear with the exhausted gratitude of someone finally allowed to cry. "Sir," I whispered, as if I were interrupting him at work. "Where did you go?" The mouth opened. No voice. Only a long thread of hair slid out, tangled with lint, strung through 2 quarters like charms. He lifted a hand and pointed at washer 12. The floor had become a shallow lake. In its mirrored skin, ceiling lights slashed into rays, flaring like underwater suns. Faces pressed up from beneath the surface, cheeks pallid, lips blue. Some were small as a palm, others as wide as a pillowcase. They crowded, jostling for space beneath me, their palms tapping impatiently against the underside as if the water were glass and my weight the only thing keeping them from standing up. When they tapped together, the ripple spelled my name, not in letters, but in the way waves arrive in order. "Who are you?" I asked the figure in the drum. It tilted its head the way I tilt mine in pictures I hate. The curve of its mouth made me want to sob for reasons that had nothing to do with fear, as if a part of me had missed it for years without knowing it was gone. It raised a hand and pressed it to the glass. An old scar on my wrist matched the pale line on its. A pink crescent, childhood bicycle kind. I pressed my hand to the spot without meaning to. Our palms met through the nothing that separated us. For a second, the humming stopped. For a second, the laundromat held me like a throat holds a word it refuses to speak. The emergency stop button on the control panel winked at me like an eye that knew a joke. I smashed it with the side of my fist. Nothing. The button gave under my skin with the resistless plush of old gum. The cycle timer flickered to 0 or Sarah's and then, helpfully, cheerfully, rolled itself to a new number I didn't recognize. 303. The lights overhead answered, dimming 3 degrees in agreement. Every machine on the floor repeated the number on their panels in red. 303, 303, 303. A digit parade that felt like marching towards something that didn't stand still. The pale man lifted his wrong hand and made a small gesture, like someone asking a cat to jump into their lap. The faces under the water grinned, a ripple of teeth, and the temperature dropped. My breath smoked. Frost sketched delicate ferns across the steel doors of the unplugged machines. The TV static condensed into a single channel. The basement, as seen from a corner no camera had ever occupied. In the picture, I stood by washer 12 with my hand on the glass, but behind me, where I knew the room was empty, the screen showed a crowd. Wet bodies, shoulder to shoulder, heads bowed. The dead at prayer. Something tapped the inside of the drum. Once, twice. Then, with the patience of an instruction, 3 times. I understood. The world had explained itself. 3 knocks to be invited in. I opened the washer the rest of the way. Warmth breathed on my face, intimate, familiar as the smell of my own shirts when the dryer gives them back. The figure reached for me, not abrupt, not violent. Its fingers were the temperature of bathwater and the texture of fabric soaked past its dignity. When it touched my wrist, the scar on both our hands lit pale, a thin crescent moon rising in skin. The floor tilted. The water climbed my shins, my knees, my thighs, not rising but choosing to be higher. The crowd behind me, whether there or only in the TV's certainty, murmured. It sounded like spin cycle heard from inside a closet. It sounded like a promise. The stair door rattled once. half-hearted like someone upstairs had tried the knob, then decided the errand could wait until morning. I said my own name aloud, not to anchor myself, but to hear how it sounded when it didn't belong to me anymore. Stay, my double whispered. But when I heard it, the word didn't mean remain. It meant surrender. It meant stop struggling and let the current learn your story. I stepped forward. The drum wasn't big enough for a body, not mine, not anyone's. But the steel yielded like a mouth remembering a favorite bite. Water folded around me like a coat. The rubber lip of the door kissed the back of my neck. Bubbles clung to my eyelashes in tiny lenses that refracted the fluorescent tubes into constellations that had never been mapped. In the curve of the glass, my double became the outside view. I became the thing behind the window, pressed flat, hands splayed. For a moment there was panic, sharp, animal, muscles screaming for air. The laundromat heard it and responded with kindness that was worse than cruelty. The machine rocked to soothe me. The hum deepened to a lullaby. The water tasted like summers from a decade I won't get back. Someone, not a person, not a ghost, but the laundromat itself, stroked my hair the way you smooth a shirt before a job interview you will not get. Then the cycle engaged. The spin began slow. The world outside the window smeared into streaks. Stool, counter, static, pale man, broken tape, ferns of frost. Faster now. The faces on the floor brightened, not lit from above, but from within, as if each mouth had learned to hold a candle. The pale man from the corner stepped into the frame of my vision, lifted his thin hand and placed his palm to the glass beside mine. His wrong wrist straightened. The click inside its joint was the last correcting of a machine put back together with love. As the drum reached its full speed, gravity stopped making promises. My chest pressed into my spine. The world became a ring of light. Through the roaring, a sound found me, the only sound that matters when you forget why you were afraid. A washing whisper, countless voices in patient chorus, all saying the same single word at different tempos until it became a fabric strong enough to wear. Home. Everything tightened, then everything loosened. When the machine finally drifted into stillness, the lights over the folding tables shone clean, white, ordinary. The frost on the unplugged doors receded into rivulets that left no trace. The TV cut to a game show rerun. The stool behind the counter sat occupied again by a woman in a house dress, cigarette tucked behind one ear, eyes on her phone, skin the warm brown of a summer that ends too quickly. Mrs. Ortega. She looked up like I'd startled her by coming in after hours. "Oh," she said, cheerful and bored. "New key holder? You're late. Start the mop after you wipe the glass." I blinked. My feet were dry. My basket sat where I must have left it, folded shirts stacked in obedient towers. Washer 12 was closed, its window clean enough to show me exactly as I had always been. I lifted my right hand. The scar on my wrist was faint, almost gone. A pink crescent healing into something you could kiss and not feel a ridge. I pressed my palm to the glass. It was cool. It did not press back. On the counter, a clipboard waited with a schedule I did not remember writing. My name led the overnight shift. The date had skipped ahead, but only by a breath, as if a cycle had finished while no one watched. A ring of keys hung on a hook. They were mine. I felt their weight in my memory like the reassuring drag of a chain around a familiar neck. I picked up the spray bottle and a wad of paper towels. The motion was practiced. I wiped the halo of handprints from Washer 12's glass in even circles until it reflected only the thin person I have always been. Behind me, the stair door opened, and a man I had never seen trudged in with a basket and a face anxious with deadlines. He nodded, the way customers nod at the late-night attendant who makes a little light feel like permission. "Hey," he said. "You open?" I smiled the way attendants smile when they mean yes and also mean you should be careful. "We're always open." He fed quarters into Washer 12 without reading the sign that said, "Out of order," in letters that had faded like a bruise. The drum clicked, locked, and began to fill. I watched the glass fog. I watched the first orbit of sleeve and towel. I watched, and I waited, and I listened for the precise moment the room would start to remember him too. Down in the drain, very far and very near, something knocked 3 times.